from the college standpoint, a couple of the stats that you were reading out just in the presentation you did earlier. Yeah, for people for listening, you just did a talk like this to our academy families and parents. And one of the things that you said was the average age of when kids can expect to get a commitment or even a conversation. So talk a little bit about that time arc of when kids can expect that on the men's side, and if you can speak to the women's side too, then great, of when they can expect to hear from coaches, be recruited, and ultimately start playing college.
Yeah, I mean that's on everyone's mind, right? Especially with the CHL drafts being so young. You know, the Western Hockey League has a bantam draft,
Yeah,
right?
it's crazy, man.
And
Yeah.
you know, their process is their
Yeah,
process.
for
Like
sure.
we respect it, but what that does to a player when they're not committing at 16 and they're scrolling on Twitter and they see, oh man, I just saw 4 tweets of guys that got commitments, and I'm their age, or maybe I'm 1 year older and I'm still playing AAA hockey. That can kind of create some anxiety in the player's mind, and they start thinking, well, what am I doing wrong, right? Where's my commitment at 16? And the fact of the matter is that we look at every player who commits um, for NCAA Division One, and we look at where they played at 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, and the age at which they earn those commitments. Um, and it's definitely more common to play U18 hockey, high school hockey, prep hockey than people think at 17 or even 18 years old, right? They think if they're not drafted in the CHL, their career's over, or if they're not earning a commitment at 16, their career's over. But the fact is that most players will not earn that commitment until they're 19 years old, the average age, and they won't start college, their NCAA career, until they're 20. And so it's just like an expectation setting that I think we work a lot on with not only parents, because I think parents are a little bit more versed in what the reality is, but we try to highlight that to players, especially, and agents we talk with as well, especially the ones in Canada. They might not be very familiar with the NCAA recruiting timeline. So just setting that expectation and letting players know, like, the most important thing to do is work on player development, right? That's the thing that's going to get you from where you're at now to where you want to go, regardless of where you're playing.
Well, and so I was actually going to jump into something like that, anyways, from the player development side, because one thing that I find I'm constantly battling in conversations with parents is, or not just parents, I should say with players, more so than parents, is they're just in a rush to get to the league that you'll tell me all the players are coming from. So if you go by the stats, like between the USHL, the NAHL, the OJHL, things are going to change because of the eligibility rule change, which we'll get to that. But at least from where it stands now, I have these conversations constantly with players that are in a rush to get to, in Ontario, the OJHL, for example, and they might not be quite ready to do that. So when you say that a kid is getting their commitment at 19 years old, that I would assume it's mostly from those leagues. Would that be correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The amount of players that commit out of minor hockey are small percentage.
Right.
Yeah.
But the age is 19.
The age is
typically.
19.
So
Yeah.
so up until 19, I think it can create like a little bit of an illusion for, let's say, a 17-year-old kid, where it's like, I need to be in the OJ today. And so rather than, be the best guy where they're at or whatever, where they actually really get that development time, they get that focus to where they're a go-to guy and they get the playing time. I find that there's a rush to try to be at that highest level for exposure purposes. So when you guys do your research, what do you find in terms of players, or do you find that players are trying to do that too soon, or does it look like they're playing the patient game?
Yeah, I mean, no one's patient, right? They want to get to the next level on the first day that they got to the next level, right? Yeah, one thing that we always highlight, we call it our player pass research, and that basically outlines where they played at 16 through 20 and when they earned their commitment. And one of the highlights of that research is identifying where players were playing at 17. And we picked 17 because it's one of those ages that it's kind of like a weird year,
gap. It's like gap.
You feel like if you're not playing juniors by then, you're like falling behind, or if you're not in a specific junior league by then, somehow falling behind. But we have so many case studies of guys that are not only in the NCAA but chose the NCAA route and are in the NHL now that were playing U18 at 17, right? And so it's just like you said, the perception is not the reality.
Yeah,
Um,
so what would it be if do you know the numbers of that? Like how many kids at 17, for example,
for which
that
province?
so whichever, like just give me an
Okay.
example, like of 17-year-olds that go on to play NCAA, maybe that go on to play in the NHL, like how what kind of percentage are we talking that are playing U18 at 17?
So I would say that we just did our BCHL event at the BCHL showcase, and I believe there was 111 guys from BC on NCAA rosters, and I want to say there of those 111, there were only like 60 some playing juniors when they were 17.
Really?
And so whatever that
So maybe half-ish.
40%
Yeah.
maybe are not playing in the BCHL. Well, that might include a handful of guys in the AJ, for
Whatever.
example. Yeah,
It's a number that
but it's definitely not insignificant. There's a lot of players playing, in that province in the CSSHL, the BCEHL, even the JPHL, matriculating on their way up to the BCHL. And yeah, and back to your player development question, people are in that province, and I use that one because the BCHL is a leader in NCAA recruitments for that province. They think all I have to do is get to the BCHL as fast as I possibly can, right? And the irony of that is the only focus you should be having is what do I have to do this year to make myself a better player and advance my development. And if that's in U18, so be it, right? I'm gonna play a ton of minutes. I'm gonna be a leader on this team. I'm gonna work out.
what was the quote you had on your presentation about being good at the job you're at now? Like
Oh
what was
yeah,
it?
yeah. So Jeff Blashill,
Yeah.
uh, years ago, Sean Hogan was our executive director. He was on staff at Western Michigan, and Blashill was a coach. And he said, "You can't focus on your next job until you do a great job where you're at."
Yeah,
Um,
that's super powerful.
and I mean, like that applies to every level, right? If you're in minor hockey, if you're in junior hockey, even in the I think back to my time in the ECHL, right? It's like guys come in and they're a high draft pick, second, third rounder, and they're down in the ECHL because they might have, spent some initial months of the season in the American League, and then they come back down to us, and in their mind, they're thinking, well, I shouldn't even be down here. I should be in the NHL, minimum, right? And it resonates at every level where, there's a reason why you're playing here, but the best part about that is you have the power to change it, right? You can do things on and off the ice to make yourself stand out and force them to give you that opportunity.
Yeah, that's super
Yeah.
powerful, man. I love that quote. When you were talking about it, I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
man, that's a banger. That
It's a
one's
good
great.
one. Yeah.
So what are you guys seeing in terms of how the NCAA landscape is changing, like Canadian players versus American players versus international players? Like
Oh yeah,
I
the
know that
international pieces.
yeah, so like
Yeah.
what's happening, because I know you were talking about the percentage in the NHL now is like 35% or so that are in the NHL that have come out of NCAA programs. Is that right? Is that the right stat? For in the NHL, 30 what is it, 1 in
Oh,
3?
33%
Yeah, 33.
of players in the NHL chose college hockey.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah, it's about 1 in 3. Yeah.
So now, because and it's growing. So because of that, what are you seeing in terms of demand from Canadian players coming over, international players coming over to join these programs, and how's that changing? Like how the schools are even doing the recruiting?
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, the CHL eligibility threw a wrench in everything, right? But up until that happened, we were seeing a steady increase in European players, especially guys that will start in the USHL. I think there were over 100 players, maybe 120 ish, don't quote me on that, of Europeans in the NCAA, which is crazy because on this year's rosters, there's 184 from Ontario. So there's 100 and some
Wow.
from, there's
Yeah, they're
almost
coming in.
the same
Yeah.
amount. Yeah. And I think that just speaks to the fact that, Europeans are kind of used to those kind of um, academy style programs where you, it's not just practicing games. It's a holistic approach. There's nutrition, there's training, there's video, and so I think the NCAA path resonates with them. And then when you look at the data and see the NHL numbers related to the NCAA, it's almost like, okay, so I could have a great career, whether I make it to the NHL or not. And then you tie the academic aspect where, I mean, you have an opportunity to go to some of the best schools in the world.
Yeah.